The views expressed on this program are not necessarily those of KYRS, its management, or its underwriters. We are the Zombie Nation. On any given day, we wander the landscape of this modern life, feeding the compulsions that lash our souls. We are driven to be successful, get that promotion, get the latest, greatest thing that will give us that latest, greatest fling. But our glazed eyes are shuttered, squinting in the glare of reality. Every living system on Earth is in decline. Our fears and our quest for security are breeding and feeding the terror of the now and of the future. We are isolated, lonely, stressed out, hungry in spirit. We are the Zombie Nation. But what can we do to rouse ourselves from this terrible dream? We must speak up to ourselves and to each other. We must confront in ourselves the addictions of consumerism, militarism, and self-indulgence. We must try to become people and communities living lives of integrity, honest about our modern life and its bitter fruits, but looking to push our society toward greater justice, better community, genuine democracy, and sustainability. We must awaken the Zombie Nation. Hi, and welcome to Zombie Nation. I'm Brad Reed. I'm your host. Zombie Nation is the show where we hope to look critically, unflinchingly, uncompromisingly at the culture that we're all a part of, a culture that keeps us enslaved, a culture that colonizes us into believing things are what they are really not, a culture that keeps us addicted to its comforts and its conveniences. And it's also the show where we hope to look at ways of building authentic communities of resistance. This is the first live show I've done in a couple of weeks. It's good to be back, and today's show will be directly related to what it will take to build authentic communities of resistance. Before I get into that, let me remind listeners that if you have a question or a comment or a suggestion or an argument, a rebuttal, an idea for a show, please email me at zombienation@kyrs.org. Today is Saturday, September 22nd, 2007. Or if you're listening to the rebroadcast, it's Tuesday, the 25th of September. And this is the weekend of the grand opening of the brand new Saranac Annex next to the community building where the studio is located. There's all kinds of festivities celebrating the opening of this new community-focused building, its construction, its energy efficiency. And in keeping with that theme of looking at positive things that are happening, today's show is going to be devoted to the U.S. Social Forum, which took place in late June and early July in Atlanta. And we're going to be speaking with two people, one a professor at Evergreen State College, who we've had on the show before, who went with a group of students to the Social Forum. And our second guest today will be a woman who runs the November Coalition up in Colville, and she's been on the show before as well. These are both folks from Washington State who traveled across the country to be part of this remarkable and unprecedented gathering of activists and organizers who gathered under the theme, "Another world is possible, another United States is necessary." And we're going to be talking with them about their experiences there, how the events of the forum, the discussions, the conversations that took place have informed what they do and their vision of what is possible both in their local communities and on a national scale. I'm not sure how many listeners are aware of the Social Forum, so we're going to talk about kind of where it came out of and look at the evolution of this sort of brand new movement, and also look with a critical eye at a number of the writings online have been fairly glowing in their praise, and I'm sure, having not been there, I'm sure it was sort of off the scale remarkable to be in a gathering of that many people with genuine concerns about real democracy and real justice and sustainability. But we want to also look critically at what was missing, what do we have still to focus on as we begin to collectivize and form a vision of trying to create, the words I've used before on the show are to create a culture of disobedience. When we come back, we'll be joined on the phone by Dan Leahy, a professor at Evergreen State College.
Never come with a warning. A revolution never sends you an omen. A revolution just arrive like the morning. Ring the alarm, we come to wake up the snoring. They're telling you to never worry about the future. They're telling you to never worry about the torture. They're telling you that you will never see the horror. Spend it all today and we will build you tomorrow. 3-piece suits and bank accounts in Bahamas. Wall Street crime will never send you to the slammer. Tell all the children in the arms of the mamas. The F-15 is a homicide bomber. TV commercial for a popper pill culture. Drug companies circling like a vulture. Amaraki babies with the G.I. Joe father. 10 years from now, is anybody gonna bother your fire? Never sends you an omen. A revolution never come with a warning. A revolution. Everyone addicted to the same nicotine. Everyone addicted to the same gasoline. Everyone addicted to a Technicolor screen. Everybody trying to get their hands on the same green.
Welcome back to Zombie Nation. As I said, we're joined now on the phone by Dan Leahy, professor of political economy and labor studies at the Evergreen State College in Olympia. Dan, thanks for coming back to Zombie Nation today.
Very welcome. Nice to be here.
One of the things I wanted to do before we get to your experience at the forum in Atlanta is for listeners who don't know where the U.S. Social Forum came from, the organization of it in late June and July. Can you describe how it came about and where it came from?
Sure. I mean, probably for the last 30 years, there's been a forum called the World Economic Forum that meets in Davos, Switzerland. And that forum is made up of corporate leaders and governmental representatives who are interested in kind of neoliberal globalization, which means basically removing all barriers to capital flows between countries. Mm-hmm. After the Seattle demonstrations against the World Trade Organization in Seattle in November of 1999, organizers in Europe and Brazil primarily decided that there needed to be a counter, that all the energy of Seattle needs to be put into a new social agenda that would counter the activities of the World Economic Forum. So they organized a thing called the World Social Forum in Porto Alegre, Brazil, in 2001, I think was the first one. That World Social Forum spun off national and regional forums all around the world. So the U.S. Social Forum was an effort to bring that social forum discussion to the United States. And it was sanctioned by the International Committee of the World Social Forum, mm-hmm. and it was promoted by organizers in Project South, which is an organization based in Atlanta. And Project South became the host committee for the first U.S.-wide social forum.
I want to get to Project South in a few minutes, but not only were you there as an individual participant, you and a colleague, Tony Zaragoza, who we had on the show earlier in the summer, before the forum in June, co-taught a class at Evergreen, and the trip involved taking students along. So can you describe a little bit about what you did in the class with the students in preparation for the trip to Atlanta?
Sure. Tony and I organized a class called Social Forums and Social Movements. And the question was whether these social forums strengthen local, national social movements or whether they weaken them. So that's what we were looking at, and we utilized the organization of the U.S. Social Forum kind of as a case study.
Okay.
And so we looked into the background of the World Economic Forum, the World Social Forum, some of the books about that. We read about global social movements and national social movements. But the way that we utilized the U.S. Social Forum was there was a group called the National Planning Committee. It's made up of organizations from around the country, and it was the organizing arm for the U.S. Social Forum. And we researched each one of those organizations. The students also researched the delegates from those organizations to the National Planning Forum, National Planning Committee. And then we basically role-played through elaborate 2-3 hour strategy games what the decision-making issues of the National Planning Committee. So those kids actually knew the leadership of the National Planning Committee, they knew the organizations, and they also had gone through many of the decisions that the actual committee had to deal with.
One of the things that in the reading that I've done in preparation for today, to get back to Project South, they have a motto, an organizing motto, as the South goes, so goes the nation. Can you talk about how that was instrumental or key in the organization of this taking place in Atlanta, as opposed to maybe back in Seattle, where maybe the seed began to germinate in 1999?
I mean, I think that Project South does have that model, that slogan, and I think it's a really important political slogan, and something that we should all think about because of the strength of the civil rights movement, for instance, that generated so much activity in other social movements and created the leadership and the models for the social movements of the late 60s and early 70s. There's also an idea that we have to overcome the racism that divides the working class in order to build a strong nationwide social movement. So Project South has that slogan, and they did their best to bring, I think, the best example of what's going on in our country to the attention of other people, and that was by bringing what's going on with New Orleans and the Gulf Coast to the Social Forum. So there's a very strong representation of the Southeast and Southwest at the Social Forum, and one of the main plenary topics was Gulf Coast reconstruction. Because in many ways, what took place in New Orleans and the Gulf Coast is an example of a highly efficient governmental action to privatize, deregulate, and eliminate the social welfare floor of this country. They did that in spades in New Orleans. They basically extracted the public sector. They closed the schools. They closed the hospitals. They closed public housing. They privatized the police force, and they dispersed people in one of the largest diasporas since the Great Depression out of that city. So I think the Project South organizers and people in the Southwest think that this is a critical moment for people to see the exact type of governmental policies that are trying to be implemented in this country, which is deprivatization, deregulation, and the enforcement of the results of that by a security state with private police forces like Blackwater, which was the first private firm into New Orleans, fresh from Iraq.
Right, and that's not a picture that we get from any kind of mainstream media, and in fact, any sort of average viewer of TV news, or I'm thinking of ESPN, the first Monday night football game back in the Superdome. New Orleans has healed, New Orleans has recovered itself, and the stories about Blackwater being the first firm. What you're describing is Naomi Klein's disaster capitalism. One of the things.
By the way, I mean, I think, for your readers, I think I've just got through the first 4 chapters of the Shock Doctrine, and I hope that your readership will pick up that book by Naomi Klein and read those first several chapters, at least, because it is a clear picture of what's happened in New Orleans and also what is been happening in countries around the world, whether you call it globalization, neoliberalism, or what. But that's a very explicit picture. And I think the mainstream media does in fact give this notion that what happened in the Gulf Coast and New Orleans was somehow a result of government inefficiency, ineffectiveness,
right.
corruption, this, that. It was not. It was a highly organized, efficient governmental action to eliminate the public sector, public wealth, and any social welfare floor that people might depend upon in times of disaster.
There's another public affairs show that called the Class War Report on KYRS, and the host, Mike Kress, was able to interview Naomi Klein earlier this week. So there's kind of a double exposure for our listeners. You're listening to Zombie Nation on KYRS, and we're speaking today with Dan Leahy, a professor of political economy and labor studies at Evergreen State College in Olympia. And Dan, with a colleague of his, went to Atlanta for the U.S. Social Forum, the very first ever U.S. Social Forum. Dan, I know that you've been an activist and organizer in a lot of ways for a lot of years. So can you comment on what was the feel like in Atlanta, and how was this perhaps different from other attempts at sort of massive left organizing?
What was the feel like? I think what the feel was like was an amazing amount of potential that wants to be put in gear.
Mm-hmm.
I think that Project South and their young organizers did an amazing job of getting 10,000 people into that city, into workshops, plenaries, into hotels, into tents. Just an amazing logistical organizing job in doing that. And I think they clearly followed a lot of their principles of putting people of color into leadership roles and bringing a wide range of diverse, anti-kind of neoliberal policy groups to Atlanta. And that was, I think, a great victory. But I think that what needs to be done again, and I'm asking that the Project South be put on this thing again, is that they do it again, and that they bring a lot of their discussion, for instance, like their slogan, as the nation. So, what's the slogan?
As the South goes, so goes the nation.
As the South goes, so goes the nation. I mean, I think that has to be explicitly addressed in conversation with everyone there, so that it can be considered, possibly transformed, and maybe rejected. But I think there's a need in going beyond kind of a self-recognition of a diverse movement to the construction of a understanding of a national moment and the construction of a national movement with a specific strategy. And so I think that U.S. Social Forum showed its potential, but it needs to be solidified and directed, and come to some common understanding of the kind of political moment that we're at and what we need to do as a result.
One of the things that that you mentioned in our communication back and forth this week is while there was this hugely significant number of young people of color in leadership roles in the organizing, that there was one thing that you noticed, and that was an absence of a kind of class analysis. And as you said, it's hard to see class, but that was, from your perspective, an element that was missing. Can you talk a little bit about that?
Well, I mean, the language of the Social Forum was that it was going to be people of color, working class led. That was that was in the propaganda. That was the purpose of it. And I think that they definitely brought a lot of young people, as you mentioned, to it. They brought a lot of people of color to leadership positions, all of which I think is really important. But I did not hear a discussion of class. I heard a discussion of how diverse we are, how culturally diverse we are, sexually diverse we are, but I didn't hear a discussion of the importance of a class analysis and bringing the working class as part of the people of color definition of the movement. And I'd like to see, I think that's, for me at least, I think that's really important, whether it's seen in organizations or in discussion, but it needs to be present there if that slogan or that idea is going to be discussed. And I didn't see it. Of course, you have to think people should know too, or if anyone's been to a social forum, is social forum is full of all kinds of activities. There's formal activities, there's tents, there's parties, there's informal gatherings, there's networking. And I, of course, only saw, one fragment of that.
Mm-hmm.
But just from that fragment, which was basically going to all the plenary sessions and many of the workshops and the marches, I didn't hear a discussion of class. And I think that needs to be done, and I hope that the next time we have the social forum in Atlanta, that gets discussed and integrated into our analysis.
And one of the things that I want to point out is, as you said it a couple of times, that it's your opinion that the next one should be back in Atlanta, and the similar planning committee should take it on again and have a better chance to refine and fine tune and add some more levels of analysis. But the plan as it exists now is for it to rotate. Is that right? To move to a different city?
I don't know that there is a plan.
Okay.
As far as I know, there's a date. Someone mentioned the date of 2010,
Mm-hmm.
And maybe another city. But frankly, Porto Alegre, the World Social Forum was in Porto Alegre for several years before it had the organizational kind of strength and clarity
Right.
to shift out into other countries.
Uh-huh.
And I think that the young organizing staff of the Project South has now got a great deal of experience under their belt, and I don't think there's any reason to throw that away or attempt at this time to transfer that knowledge to some other site.
Mm-hmm.
I think that group of people and the National Planning Committee should do it again in Atlanta, because there's so much more that a social forum is. I mean, the social forum could also, just think what 10,000 people could bring to a homeless shelter or to an organizing drive or to, that wasn't there. You could work the relationship between a city and the organizing struggles of the city,
Mm-hmm.
and people coming to the forum. There was also all this history in Atlanta that we barely got to touch.
Mm-hmm.
The civil rights history, the movement history, that also needs to be integrated in the social forum. And I think those organizers at Project South, now that they got the logistics down, they can, move the discussion both politically and historically to a higher level.
Right.
And then
Right.
once they do that, then they can export it, but not just yet. And plus, they have to do it a lot earlier than 2010.
Right, and you mentioned again in the communication we had this week that 2010. If we're we've got in the election cycle already begun for 2008, and the historical moment by 2010. A piece of it may have passed, and there's no reason to assume that whoever ends up occupying the White House will change the direction of this consolidation of military national security state.
Yeah, the political point of the social forums is however one wants to think about it, is that the political parties, the social democratic parties in Europe or the Democratic Party here in the United States, or other types of political party formations in the world, has not been able to stop all this stealing of public wealth,
Mm-hmm.
And extraction of the wages of the working class, or the extraction of social welfare. They have not stopped. In fact, they have facilitated all around the world. So therefore, is there some other force that it can in fact be organized that will build a new agenda? And there's this idea that this is the social forum process, that the social forum process is the mechanism to bring together all these social movements and create a new form of governance that will challenge those neoliberal policies of privatization of our schools and deregulation of capital. Well, if that's the case, then we have to be ready to do it again and stronger in 2008, because there's no indication that any political party in the United States is going to do anything but facilitate that increased security state. And the security state, has nothing to do with, foreign terrorists. The security state is about clamping down on opposition to the tremendous taking of wealth here in the United States. That's what it's about.
Mm-hmm. And any significant change in that kind of pattern, and I'm sure you teach this in all your classes, that historically that doesn't come about electorally. It comes out through the forming of mass people's movements.
It does. It does. I mean, it can get reflected in electoral activity, but it is people on the ground.
Right.
That that needs to be constructed. I mean, the anti-war movement became a subsidiary of the Kerry campaign and lost its legitimacy. That has to be reconstructed.
Right. We're talking today on Zombie Nation with Dan Leahy, a professor of political economy and labor studies at the Evergreen State College, and a participant along with his students in the first ever U.S. Social Forum in late June and early July in Atlanta. Dan, I want to ask you one last question, and that is, and this has been on my mind a lot lately, and it's the idea that as the left organizes to present a viable alternative to this pattern of consolidation of power and the solidifying of the national security state, that there's a danger that it's done hierarchically, which seems to go against the whole grain of why we want to build these movements, which should be about authentic democracy. What did you see at the forum that speaks to that? I mean, there's one of the incidents that got covered was Medea Benjamin from Code Pink being pied, a kind of perhaps playful statement against there being this elite leadership on the left. But what was the sense you got of the participants there, the organizers, paying attention to the need to make this authentic and broad-based and democratic?
Well, I'll say two things. One, I think there was a very strong ethic on the part of organizers, and I presume the National Planning Committee, to in fact highlight local, regional organizations and leadership. You still there?
Still here.
Okay. And so I think they were successful there, and that was reflected, in the, for instance, the plenary sessions.
Mm-hmm.
But I think the thing that needs to be done is you need to ask those local and regional leaders who are, in fact, have a base at the local level, what their national perspective is.
Right.
We don't necessarily need,
sense.
National, folks coming in. I mean, I'm not opposed to it, but I think that what could have been done is ask those regional, local leaders not only to talk about their kind of on-the-ground organizing, but ask them to step outside that and say what, this movement should be shaped like nationally.
Mm-hmm. Mm-hmm.
I think that would have been really helpful. And I think that way you maintain this kind of, I don't know if it's decentralized, but I want to say, social movements grow because they have a group of leaders that are attached to a larger base that's on the ground and can be moved.
Right.
And when you connect up all those little local movement centers, then you have a national social movement. So I think the thing that could be done is to increasingly ask local and regional leadership that have an actual base on the ground in their communities, in their unions, to talk about what's required at the national level to expand and extend their organizing drives.
I want to thank you very much for the work that you do. I also want to thank you for the contacts you've given me. Next week's show will be involving a couple of the students who went to the social forum.
Great.
And I want to hear the real feelings from the younger movement leaders as you've described them. I know you're taking off next week for Europe. I hope you have a great trip, and I'm grateful to you for taking the time today and for the work that you do at Evergreen. And I hope when you get back we can talk again.
You bet. You're welcome.
Thanks, Dan.
All right, man. Bye.
Walking down the street in the town I was born. I I was moving to a beat that I never felt before. So I opened up my eyes and I took a look around. I saw it written across the sky. The revolution starts now. Yeah, the revolution starts now. Starts now. When you rise above your fear, but the walls are raining down. The revolution starts here. Where you work and where you play, where you lay your mother down, what you do and what you say. The revolution starts now. Yeah, the revolution starts now. Yeah, the revolution starts now. In your own backyard, in your own hometown. What you do is standing around, just follow your heart. The revolution starts now. Last night I had a dream that the world had turned around. All our hopes had come to be, and the people gathered around. They all brought what they could bring, and nobody knew that. Another song to sing. The revolution starts now.
Welcome back to Zombie Nation. We're joined now on the phone by Nora Callahan, who is the executive director of the November Coalition based in Colville, Washington. Nora, thanks so much for joining us again on Zombie Nation.
Thank you for having me.
I was thinking this morning that I think in maybe some sectors of Spokane's listening audience, the November Coalition might be not an intentionally well-kept secret, but a group that not enough people know about. So
we have people working all around the country, but I think it's good to recap it. What we are is a nonprofit group that founded in 1997. And we were a small group of people initially who had loved ones who had been sentenced under the mandatory drug sentencing laws and what they call sentencing guidelines. And most of our members still today are in the federal system of the federal prison system, but a lot of them are also in the state systems because the laws are about 25 years old in the federal system now, about 20 years old. And we're modeled after Washington State's drug sentencing system that had started here the year before. So there was a lot of interest in our state and elsewhere because so many people in the interim, which then was about 10 years into the laws being in place, that the prison population in the country quadrupled.
Right.
So we, so that's when our group formed, and what we do is to try to take people like myself, because my brother had been arrested, I had been personally affected by these laws, and to take people like myself who were basically, most of us at the time were very isolated. We felt a lot of shame to have a loved one sent to prison on drug charges, but we felt their sentences weren't fair. So slowly through the years, people began to realize, well, we can leave this isolation of shame and begin to speak out. And my brother had been in prison about 7 years before the coalition formed. So I knew that we needed to cut this process down to not have people wait for years and years.
Right.
And finally say, well, the laws need to be changed. And the Internet played a vital role in all of that because we put a website online, and that was before many people knew how to do websites.
Mm-hmm.
And I learned it on my own. I felt really determined that this was a new method of communication and an affordable one. So between a website and a published newspaper into prisons and on the outside and distribution of that paper, we were able to be part of an emergent movement which is now recognizable as and called the drug reform movement.
Mm-hmm. So on the surface, it looks like the November Coalition works on changing drug policy, works on issues of the drug war, but when you were on the show earlier in December, we were talking about the prison industrial complex and every aspect of the drug war, and you know this better than I do, has deep roots and tentacles that reach everywhere in society. So
yes, you can't separate what we knew early on, and this is what I'm on the show to talk about today with your visitors, is we were part of the United States Social Forum,
mm-hmm.
which are people from all over the world that gathered in Atlanta, Georgia last, oh my goodness, was that in June? I've been traveling, so.
Late June, early July.
Late June, early July, yes. And so we gathered there with people from all over the world, and in part, we wanted to go there to learn about other critical issues, to
mm-hmm.
recognize and find the links to other issues. Because for years we've known that when people stand alone, the chance for victory is slim. When we can stand together and
right.
recognize our other issues as linking, then we have a better chance to defeat what we'll call the enemy. But the enemy is what?
Mm-hmm.
And that's what we wanted to go. I think we went to the Social Forum because we knew we would find people there that know that the drug war is the main culprit behind the rapid rise of the prison industrial complex.
Right.
We also wanted to connect with people overseas who have known for years that the U.S.-inspired drug war is affecting them in their regions. And we've made the connects through the years, but to make more is always a good thing. So that's why we were there, to learn about other people's issues and to share our issue with others who might not make the connects.
I want to focus specifically on the column that you wrote in the summer 2007 edition of your newspaper, The Razor Wire, which folks can see online at www.november.org. Because I think in the column, it's volume 10, I believe, summer 2007, you make some pretty brilliant linkages between the drug war and all of the other issues that folks concerned about social justice and sustainability work on. So without reading it to the listeners, can you talk a little bit about how you see your specific work at the November Coalition tied to issues like water rights and food security and those other sort of sustainability issues that folks work on?
Yes. Well, the water connects with the drug war. Is the drug war fuels the prison expansion. And when you look at prison expansion, what we find are that we stack up human beings, a lot of them, into a very small space. And that takes extraordinary amounts of water
mm-hmm.
to
mm-hmm.
service a prison. And a new component of prisons over the last 20 years has been the proliferation of factories attached to prisons.
Right.
That they can put the prisoners to work for essentially no wage to do the work of private enterprise, also competing for jobs. It's
mm-hmm,
not all
mm-hmm.
overseas. That's another aside. But the water can become contaminated. Early on, before there was an outcry, for instance, before there was an outcry about the hazardous waste that computers generated, even in the federal system, the federal prison industries was involved with prisoners dismantling computers without any protective gear
mm-hmm.
and little oversight, if any oversight, from other environmental protection agencies. And in a place called Fort Devens, they build the prisons on toxic waste dumps, places that are slotted for EPA cleanup often have a prison come first, then the cleanup, which is suspect to begin with, because we all know, what's under the prison and around the prison grounds, but contaminated waste. But then they have industries that are often not regulated by other authorities conducting business, and that ends up in part of the wastewater. People that are concerned with the amount of pharmaceutical drugs found in wastewater because our bodies don't break it all down need to be concerned with prisons, because most prisoners are medicated while they're in prison. So all of this wastewater has higher concentrations of pharmaceutical drugs than the average public has. And then with the factories attached that aren't able to be regulated, I mean, we really have to look at the wastewater coming from prisons.
And as you said yourself, we've got these human beings stacked in these human warehouses.
Yes.
We view them in the society as disposable people, and so where this prison/factory is built doesn't really matter if they have to deal with the toxics and the chemotherapeutic and pharmaceutical waste that's sort of
unsustainable human density.
Right.
I believe that Earth First, or one of the big environmental groups, coined that phrase early on when they looked at the issue, and we thought, yes, that's what it is. It's unsustainable human density.
Mm-hmm.
The other connects with the drug war we found were around food security, because we went to workshops where people were talking about in their countries the inability for the farmers and the ordinary people to own seeds, food seeds.
Right.
The drug war connects are there because the governments of the world have long contended that certain seeds and plants are illegal because they might produce, under some circumstances or some processing methods, the ability for these plants or seeds to create a psychoactive effect.
Mm-hmm.
So when the government says, well, we're going to own these, it can be as simple as like the marijuana plant being illegal, even though it doesn't kill people, it doesn't cause death, those things.
Right.
And indigenous people in the world have used that as a medicine for eons of time.
Mm-hmm.
But now governments come and say that's illegal. Opium plants, poppies that grow freely all over the world, those are illegal to possess under certain circumstances. But you can't plant a wildflower garden without them showing up because the seeds are in all the packages.
Mm-hmm.
So we have these policies that are saying that some plants and seeds are illegal for you to own. And then we have the corporate movement to own food seed.
Absolutely.
And so the connects are there because people of the world need to realize that if the governments and corporations are controlling our food and medicine, we are totally at their mercy.
Mm-hmm.
Yes.
Right. When Monsanto owns the patent and the copyright on certain kinds of food grains and prevents local farmers in India or even in this country from saving seeds that they've saved in their families for generations because it works. I mean, that's where we are. We're at this mechanistic view of controlling nature.
Nature, and human beings are part of nature.
Right.
We're not separate. And for us to see that was really clear as they were talking about the new laws around food seeds. We realized had started around laws controlling drug plants that drugs were made from.
You're listening to Zombie Nation on KYRS. We're speaking with Nora Callahan, who is the executive director of the November Coalition, which is based up in Colville. And Nora was one of the Eastern Washington participants in the recent first ever U.S. Social Forum in Atlanta in late June and early July. In addition to those issues, water rights and food security, Nora, obviously the connections are sort of probably too obvious, but I want you to talk a little bit about them between the work you do on the drug war and drug policy and issues of gender and race and class, which were front and center at the forum from the reading that I've done. Can you talk about those connections as well?
Yes. Well, the connections with the drug war to race and class are pretty well known to a lot of people now, but I'll recap quickly. As your skin gets darker, and you might be drug involved or mentioned to the police as drug involved. As a person's skin goes from white to darker, the darker the person's skin is, the more apt they are to do time in prison around drugs. And that's been fully documented now for the entire length of the drug war, which is now almost 30 years of warring on people. So essentially what we have is a double standard where white middle-class people use the most amount of illegal drugs because white middle-class people are the most of the population. Next to that are the upper-class people with white skin. Yet when you look at the prison population, it's mostly black, brown people in prison. In some metropolitan areas, they have 1 out of 3 young African-American men are in prison on drug charges.
Mm-hmm. There's a line in your column in the Razor Wire, if they, meaning the powerful, the elite, wealthy few, both corporations and politicians, if they cared about our futures, would we be building cages for our youth? And I think the way you articulate that vision is a continuing theme that needs to be hit over and over again. I'm a high school teacher, and in many ways, I think the school system is a social construct that reinforces this sort of caging of young people, and so that it works very much like a prison. Not to say that it is at all in the same severity as real prisons, but it's sort of creeping down into every aspect of our society.
I think it has. It's called a commodification or codification. Commodification.
Right.
We see it in clothing in our culture too. So we see even people willingly going to the store to buy clothing that looks like prison garb. So we have to look at all of it and wonder, where are we going with this? I know that we saw schools as soon as we saw the metal detectors and lockdowns, students no longer allowed to leave the campus, no strangers allowed on the campus. We saw that as something that was indicative of where we were going, a highly controlled society. And so the prison proliferation, interestingly enough, while this prison expansion turned into a prison industrial complex in just 10 years' time, by 1990 we had an identifiable industrial complex of prisons that had sprung up in 10 years. There was almost no public outcry during the period of tremendous growth. The reason why was because to be tough on criminals is sexy and it gets people votes. Politicians can get elected by saying, yeah, we're going to get tough on the criminals. What we're seeing in Spokane, it's interesting because they have oversight meetings on the police, and people come out, and who are the criminals? Mostly it ends up being a class issue.
Exactly.
And that's where, again, back to the social forum, these policies that corporate people put into place that's going to benefit them, because we've already established that when corporate people are involved in drug crime, they're going to go to a treatment center likely.
Right.
People don't seem to understand, when people are consuming the drug, they're buying it, therefore they are part of a drug conspiracy. But these drug conspirators rarely go to prison. So when you look at the system, you have laws that they pass that they're going to be immune from, that they're likely going to find their way around and get out of. When people are poor and underprivileged in that they don't have the money to get a lawyer, they get a public defender, who, by the way, gets about 4 hours on a case. Public defender spends about that. The average amount is about 4.5 hours on a federal drug case. The state drug cases, it's probably even less. But at any rate, you look at 4 hours, that's nothing. That's no time to build defense against these terrible charges, often multiple charges. So the poorer the person is, and the less means they have, the less ability they have to protect themselves from the law. Of course, those are the people that are going to end up in prison and doing more time. So what we're contending is when you look at it, during this prison expansion, corporations got filthy rich. They were making money building them, no matter if the taxpayers owned them. But the other problem we have occur in our country was the private prison industries grew and profited mightily. So we saw not only the growth of tax dollar owned prisons, but tax dollar supported prisons via the private industries.
Right.
And for instance, a toilet for a prison, a vandal-proof toilet, is $1,400, one toilet.
Huh.
So the profits are just obscene and disgusting. So we had all these people getting rich, and then all the toys they use in prisons, like the tasers and drug detection machines for visitors and all these expensive electronic equipment, made other corporations rise up and become very powerful. Then when 9/11 happened, all the money around Homeland Security, scads and millions of uncounted dollars, thus far we don't even know how much dollars, has gone into policing. Not terrorists, but us.
Right, exactly.
So it's time that we look at issues, holistically and together. When we look at the police, we're very frustrated because over-policing is also something that's come out of drug war policing.
Right.
Because the initial merger of police enforcement agencies who once had a check and balance on each other, they merged into Special Drug Task Force, and that was a first in our country. The police forces have always been separate, county from city, state patrol from county officers, and then we had this kind of automatic system of checks and balances because our police forces were separate.
And you've got this increasing, and I'm not telling you anything you don't already know, but the increasing militarization of local law enforcement in the name of fighting drug trafficking, raising hysteria about gangs and gangs taking over cities. And and I'm very grateful to you for the work that you do and the way that you make these important linkages. I just want to ask you before we have to go, if there's anything that you want to say, your sense of what you take away from the social forum in Atlanta that maybe informs the work that you do in a new way, or any last impression of your experience there as a participant.
I think that the lasting impression is that we all knew that we were going to go home and work harder to do things in our own geographical regions, which in ours, is all of eastern Washington and takes in the frontier of all the way over to Montana. To take people in our position, they're wanting to build a 4,500 bed facility between Idaho and Washington.
Right.
When I say they, it's law enforcement inspired mostly. And that's something, when we came home, we were more than ever determined that this wouldn't happen, that we wouldn't allow 4,500 citizens living in these rural areas who mostly need jobs and hope for the future.
Right.
To go to prison, to be warehoused in prison. That we would come home and make sure that didn't happen. And we put up a website. It's nonewprisons.org. It's kind of a companion to November, to where people can learn more about opposing prison construction in their region.
Okay.
And protect their water and their civil rights.
Thank you so much for the work that you do, and I'm glad that with your busy travel schedule we were able to talk to you today. I want to encourage listeners to check out the work of the November Coalition at november.org. And Nora just mentioned the nonewprisons.org to understand these deep and insidious connections between these issues, so that we can better equip ourselves to form a movement in this region that makes sense. Nora, thank you.
We're going to start scheduling. We'll have at least 3 meetings in Spokane this winter, so you'll be hearing from us on that.
Thank you so much, Nora. We'll talk to you again soon.
Thank you, Brad.
Bye-bye.
Bye-bye.
She's calling in the wind.
Welcome back to Zombie Nation. We only have a few minutes left today. I'm really excited about today's show, and I'm excited about leading into next week, where we talk to a couple of students who went with Dan Leahy and the group from Evergreen to talk to them about their impressions and how it informs their thinking and their visions of the future and their attempts at organizing a meaningful local, statewide, national movement. I'm deeply grateful to Dan and to Nora for their time today and for the work that they've done. There's something about a gathering of that many people, which is, despite any criticisms and flaws in the way it's implemented and carried out, is nothing short of remarkable to be in the presence of that many people. I wasn't there. I can only imagine. I was fortunate and able to go to the Bioneers Conference last October in San Rafael, California. And while, as you've heard me say on the show, I have some critiques of the Bioneers and the way they carry out their work, there's something about being in the presence of that many people who are committed to be in the same place to create an authentic, sustainable, and just and humane vision of the future that is beyond empowering. I want to read as a kind of a final thought a passage from Nora's column in the summer 2000 edition of the Razor Wire, the November Coalition's newspaper. She writes, "Mostly people at this social forum this year find the thread of common oppression boils down to greed, the idea that a few people would get rich by creating policies that devastate thousands and thousands and thousands of people. Those policies need to go. It feels good to be with thousands of people who find common ground in our various focused struggles." That's what that's the energy of the social forum. That's what we need to capture at a national level, but I think almost more importantly at a local level, to gather together to have the conversations about what it will take to make this region, this locality, sustainable, just, and humane. Because as Dan said when we were talking, if local movements who have a base of people on the ground can articulate that to a wider audience, the local movements can then stitch together and make something bigger that is real and that is lasting. One of my favorite quotes I'll end today's show with is a quote attributed to Subcomandante Marcos of the Zapatista National Liberation Army. It's the theme of the U.S. Social Forum, the theme of the World Social Forum, but I like the way Marcos says it. "May the world which is to come have the distinctive signature of no one." Thanks for listening to Zombie Nation. See you next week.
You are listening to KYRS LP Thin Air Community Radio, heard on 92.